August 6, 1945, Tinian Island, Pacific Ocean. Before the first light of dawn touched the sea, 12 American airmen stood beside a silver B-29 bomber that would change the course of human history. Its name, painted in black beneath the cockpit, was Enola Gay. Inside its bomb bay rested a single weapon, a 2-feet device so powerful it could end the deadliest war the world had ever known. This was not just another mission. This was the flight that would deliver the message that ended World War II. The air on Tinian Island was heavy with salt and silence. Floodlights shimmered off the polished metal fuselage as ground. Crews moved like shadows, whispering, checking, securing. The sound of tools clinking against steel broke the still air. A group of mechanics, faces streaked with oil and exhaustion, carefully guided a hydraulic lift beneath the bomber's belly. Hanging from it was Little Boy, the first uranium-based atomic bomb ever prepared for combat. Its dull metallic casing gave no hint of the force it contained. It looked harmless, but everyone there knew what it meant. The dawn of a weapon unlike any before. Colonel Paul W. Tibbets, only 30 years old, watched closely. He had chosen the plane's name himself, in honor of his mother, Enola Gay Tibbets. To the men under his command, he was calm and steady, the kind of officer who could make a room quiet just by walking in. But beneath his composure was an understanding that few could bear. He knew what this flight represented, not just for the war, but for humanity itself. Nearby, Major Thomas Farabee, the bombardier, reviewed the bomb's release procedures for the 50th time. The calculations were perfect. Altitude, wind speed, drop time. Captain Theodore Dutch Van Kirk, the navigator, unfolded his maps across the metal floor, marking bearings from Tinian to Japan. They had done this countless times before. Yet tonight, everything felt different. As the mechanics sealed the bomb bay, Major William Parsons, the Navy Ordnance Officer, performed the final safety checks. Only he and Tibbets knew that the bomb would be armed mid-flight, to minimize the risk of disaster during takeoff. The fuses and detonators, the heart of Little Boy, would remain inactive until the bomber was hours into the mission. At 2:30 a.m., the engines of the Enola Gay began to rumble. The sound rolled across the airfield, a deep mechanical growl that vibrated through the ground. One by one, the massive propellers spun to life. The island shook as hundreds of soldiers gathered silently at a distance, watching. Few knew what they were witnessing, but they sensed it was something that would be remembered long after the war. At 2:45 a.m., the control tower cleared the runway. The signal light flashed green. Colonel Tibbets pushed the throttles forward, and the bomber began to move. Slow at first, then faster, the wheels pounding against coral gravel. The engines roared as if straining against the weight of history itself. Moments later, the Enola Gay lifted into the Pacific night, its silver wings catching the faint light of the stars. Below, the island faded to black. Ahead lay more than 2,500 miles of open ocean, and the city of Hiroshima. For hours, the bomber flew in darkness. Inside, the crew spoke little, each man focused on his task. The hum of the engines filled the cabin, steady and relentless. Navigator Van Kirk checked bearings against the stars. The pilot adjusted altitude to avoid Japanese radar. In the rear compartment, Parsons and his assistant, Sergeant Morris Jepson, prepared to arm the bomb. The arming procedure began at 7 a.m. They moved carefully, speaking only when necessary. Parsons inserted the explosive firing plug. Jepson connected the electrical circuits. The bomb was now live. For the first time in history, an atomic weapon was armed in flight. Parsons took a deep breath. "It's ready," he said quietly. The rest of the crew heard him through the intercom. and the cabin fell into a deeper silence. As the morning sun rose, the Japanese mainland came into view, a stretch of green valleys, winding rivers and sleeping cities. Below them, the coast of Shikoku glowed faintly in the early light. At 8:09 a.m., the crew received confirmation. Weather conditions over Hiroshima were clear. The city was visible from 31,000 feet. The mission would proceed. To the men on board, Hiroshima looked peaceful. Small clusters of wooden homes, factories, a castle near the river's edge. The Ioi Bridge, shaped like a perfect T, stood out as a landmark. That bridge would become the aiming point, the center of the city's destruction. At 8:12 a.m., Tibbets ordered the bomb bay doors open. The hydraulic whine echoed through the fuselage. The wind howled into the cabin. Farabee leaned over his Norden bomb sight, steady hands adjusting the crosshairs. He tracked the bridge, the streets, the curve of the river, then locked in the coordinates. "Ready," he said. The moment stretched like eternity. Then at 8:15 a.m., Farabee pressed the release. Little Boy fell silently through the open sky, a dark cylinder spinning slowly, vanishing beneath the bomber. For 43 seconds, the world held its breath. At 1,900 feet above the ground, the bomb detonated. A flash brighter than the sun exploded across the sky. Even at their altitude, the light filled the cockpit with blinding white fire. The men shielded their eyes behind thick goggles. Then came the shock wave, a deep, rolling thunder that hit the aircraft like a giant's fist. Below, Hiroshima ceased to exist. A fireball 1 mile wide engulfed the city in less than a second. The temperature at the center of the blast exceeded 1 million degrees. Buildings, bridges, and people vanished in an instant. The mushroom cloud rose faster than any storm on Earth. A column of smoke, dust, and fire that climbed 40,000 feet into the air. In the cockpit, the crew sat frozen. No one spoke. The light faded, leaving only the rising pillar of destruction beneath them. Major Farabee's hands trembled slightly as he wrote the time in his logbook, 8:15 a.m., Hiroshima. Co-pilot Robert Lewis finally broke the silence, his voice low, almost a whisper. "My God," he said, "what have we done?" The Enola Gay banked sharply, turning away from the growing cloud. They circled once, instruments recording the blast's magnitude. The other two observation planes, the Great Artiste and Necessary Evil, captured photographs and data as the city below burned in silence. Colonel Tibbets kept his eyes on the horizon. His face was unreadable, but the weight of command pressed on his shoulders. He knew what this meant. The war would end, but the world would never be the same. As the bomber turned back toward the Pacific, the men watched the smoke rise behind them, a pillar marking the end of an era. For them, the mission was complete. For the world, it was the beginning of something new. A dawn forged in light and fire. August 6, 1945, over the Pacific Ocean, returning from Hiroshima. The Enola Gay flew through a sky that had turned strangely quiet. Behind them, the towering mushroom cloud of Hiroshima still rose into the heavens, a ghostly reminder of what they had unleashed. The crew sat in stunned silence. The hum of the 4 Wright Cyclone engines was the only sound filling the cabin. Colonel Paul Tibbets glanced over his shoulder at the men behind him. No one spoke. Even after hours in the air, the crew hadn't recovered from what they saw. The flash, the shockwave, the column of fire. It had been unlike anything they had ever witnessed. Bombardier Thomas. Farabee removed his goggles and stared blankly at the instruments. He had carried out his mission perfectly. Yet his mind replayed the moment over and over. The release. The countdown, the flash. He whispered to himself, "It was just a target." just another target. But deep down, he knew it wasn't. Navigator Van Kirk leaned over his charts, his pencil shaking slightly as he plotted their course back to Tinian Island. "We'll be home in 6 hours," he said, his voice quiet, almost mechanical. In the rear of the plane, Major William Parsons, the Navy ordnance officer who armed the bomb mid-flight, checked his logbook. His hands were still trembling. He looked up toward the front of the aircraft and said softly, "It worked exactly as designed." The words felt hollow. The airman next to him didn't reply. He just stared out the window, watching the fading glow on the horizon. For the first time, the men began to talk. Not about victory, not about glory, but about what they had just done. Co-pilot Robert Lewis turned to Tibbets. "Colonel," he said, "do you think they knew what hit them?" Tibbets didn't answer immediately. His eyes remained fixed on the horizon. "No," he finally said. It was over before they could look up. As the Enola Gay approached its home base, word had already spread across the island. Every radar operator, mechanic, and intelligence officer knew the mission had been successful. The Japanese city of Hiroshima, the primary target, was gone. The control tower cleared the bomber for landing. The massive B-29 touched down smoothly, the tires screeching against the coral runway. As the engines shut off, a crowd of officers and engineers rushed forward. The crew disembarked one by one, exhausted, silent, faces pale from the strain. General Carl Spaatz and several senior officers were waiting. When Colonel Tibbets stepped onto the tarmac, Spaatz shook his hand firmly. "Congratulations, Colonel," he said. "You've just made history." Tibbets nodded, but his expression didn't change. "Yes, sir," he said quietly. "I suppose we have." Inside the briefing tent, the men were handed cold water and sandwiches, though few could eat. Intelligence officers gathered around as photos from the observation planes were developed and projected onto a screen. The images left the room speechless. From 31,000 feet, the city of Hiroshima was nothing but smoke and flame. The iconic T-shaped bridge, once the bombing aim point, was gone. Entire blocks had been erased. A ring of destruction spread outward for miles. One officer whispered, It's like the earth itself burned." Tibbets stood at the back of the room, arms crossed, watching the images without emotion. Deep inside, he felt the weight of command. He had done his duty, but at a cost that no soldier had ever faced before. Washington, D.C., same day, 11 a.m. Thousands of miles away, President Harry S. Truman was aboard the USS Augusta when the radio operator handed him a coded message from Tinian. Mission completed successfully. Primary target destroyed. Truman read it twice. Then he looked up and said to his aides, "This is the greatest thing in history." Hours later, he announced to the world that the United States had dropped an atomic bomb on Hiroshima, a new and most cruel bomb that had destroyed an entire city in seconds. The message spread across every continent. Newspapers scrambled to print headlines. "American atomic bomb destroys Hiroshima. City vanishes in single blast. A new era of warfare begins." But for the men on Tinian Island, there was no celebration. That evening, as the sun sank over the Pacific, the Enola Gay crew sat quietly outside their barracks. Some wrote letters home. Others simply stared into the ocean. Co-pilot Lewis took out his logbook and scribbled the words that would later become famous. "My God, what have we done?" Tibbets, sitting apart from the others, looked out toward the horizon. He had no regrets. At least, that's what he told himself. The mission had saved countless lives, he believed, by bringing the war to an end. Yet as the sound of the waves mixed with the distant hum of bombers returning from other missions, even he couldn't escaped the feeling that something in the world had changed forever. The next morning, news arrived. Japan still had not surrendered. Despite Hiroshima's destruction, the imperial government remained silent. The war was not over yet, and so plans began for the second mission, the one that would target Nagasaki. August 9, 1945. Tinian Island, 030 a.m. 3 days had passed since Hiroshima. The Pacific sky was calm, the stars still burning bright over Tinian. Yet an unease hung over the island like a thick fog. The crew of the boxcar, the bomber, assigned to the second mission, moved silently across the airfield. Their aircraft, a sleek silver B29, awaited in the dim light, engines humming softly, ready to carry the next weapon of unimaginable power. The target this time was Nagasaki, a bustling port city in southern Japan, known for its shipyards and industrial centers. Like Hiroshima, it had largely escaped conventional bombing and was strategically important. The U.S. military, under strict orders, had prepared to deploy a plutonium-based bomb, codenamed Fat Man. Unlike Little Boy, this weapon was heavier, more complex, and more unstable. Every step required precision, every movement a test of nerves. On board, Major Charles Sweeney commanded the mission. Beside him, co-pilot Captain Frederick Ashworth checked instruments and coordinates. Bombardier Major Kermit Behan went over the final calculations for the bomb drop. In the rear, Second Lieutenant Morris Jepson, who had armed the bomb in flight, prepared once more to handle the plutonium core, the heart of destruction. Every man understood the weight of history pressing upon them. The memory of Hiroshima still lingered. A city erased in an instant. Millions of lives changed forever. Yet military orders were absolute. The second strike was necessary to compel Japanese surrender. By 03:30 a.m., the engines roared. The massive B-29 lifted smoothly into the sky, leaving Tinian's coral runway behind. The Pacific Ocean stretched below, endless, tranquil, and deceptive. The sun had not yet risen. Darkness hid the horror about to descend on Nagasaki. Over Japan, 10:58 a.m., the flight was longer than the first mission. Clouds drifted in the sky, masking the city below. Pilots and bombardiers held their positions, eyes scanning every radar reading and weather report. The atomic bomb had to be dropped with exact precision. Timing was critical. Too early or too late, and the effect would be diminished. Major Behan peered through the Norden bomb sight, adjusting for altitude, wind, and trajectory. The sprawling city of Nagasaki came into view, its rivers glinting like silver threads beneath the rising sun. Factories, homes, and bridges stretched across hills and valleys. On the ground, people carried on unaware of the peril descending from above. At 11:01 a.m., the bomb bay doors opened. The hydraulic hiss echoed across the fuselage. Fat Man, 300 pounds of plutonium and high explosives, hung ready for release. Lieutenant Jepson double-checked the arming mechanism. Every wire, every fuse, every timer had to function perfectly. "Ready," Behan said. His voice was calm, but inside, adrenaline surged. Sweeney nodded. "Release." The bomb fell. For 75 seconds, it dropped through the sky, a silent harbinger of destruction. The crew counted each heartbeat, each second stretching into eternity. Then came the flash, a light brighter than any sun, an explosion that ripped across the city like a giant tearing the earth apart. The boxcar banked sharply to escape the blast radius. Windows rattled, the fuselage shuddered, but the aircraft held. Below, Nagasaki vanished into fire and smoke. The terrain itself seemed to boil. Hills, bridges, and thousands of buildings were destroyed instantly. The temperature reached millions of degrees at the epicenter. The crew watched in stunned silence. Some shielded their eyes, others stared in disbelief. The reality was immediate, visceral. The devastation was worse than any bombing raid in history. Return flight, 2:06 p.m., Pacific Ocean. As the plane headed back to Tinian, the men were quiet. Not a word was spoken. Only the hum of engines and the faint crackle of radio transmissions. The reality of their mission weighed heavily on each of them. Hiroshima had been one city. Nagasaki was the second. In less than a week, two cities, hundreds of thousands of lives, had been erased by American ingenuity, courage, and precision. Return flight, 2:06 p.m., Pacific Ocean. As the plane headed back to Tinian, the men were quiet. Not a word was spoken. Only the hum of engines and the faint crackle of radio transmissions. The reality of their mission weighed heavily on each of them. Hiroshima had been one city. Nagasaki was the second. In less than a week, two cities, hundreds of thousands of lives, had been erased by American ingenuity, courage, and precision. Major Sweeney sat forward, staring through the cockpit window. "History will remember this day," he said softly. "We carried the message that ended the war, but the weight of that knowledge was heavy." In private, many crew members grappled with conflicting emotions: pride in completing their mission, fear for the consequences, and an understanding that the world would never be the same. Impact and aftermath. Tinian Island, August 10th, 1945. When the bombers returned to Tinian, the base was alive with activity. News had already reached Washington. Japan was considering surrender. President Truman's announcement would soon confirm the news. For the men who flew these missions, their part was complete. But reflection had only begun. They had executed orders with precision and bravery, showing the world the reach and dominance of American air power. Yet beneath the medals and praise lay a somber truth. The power to end war had come at unimaginable cost. The atomic bombings demonstrated not only technological superiority but also the courage and professionalism of American soldiers, willing to carry the heaviest responsibility in history. They had delivered the ultimate message, that World War II was over and the era of nuclear warfare had begun. August 10th, 1945, Tinian Island, Pacific Ocean. The sun rose over the coral runway, casting long golden shadows across the B29 bombers that had returned from Japan. The Enola Gay and Boxcar stood silently, their silver hulls gleaming in the morning light. Monuments to a mission that had forever altered the course of human history. The airmen moved quietly, performing post-flight checks, debriefing, and logging every detail with methodical precision. They were soldiers who had executed their duty with discipline, but the weight of what they carried, both literal and moral, lingered like a shadow over every man. Colonel Paul Tibbets walked along the tarmac, his expression unreadable. Yet his mind replayed every detail of the flight over Hiroshima. He remembered the flash, the fireball, the shockwave that had rolled across the city below. He recalled the stunned silence in the cockpit, the muffled breaths of his crew, and the realization that their actions had changed the world in a single instant. He had carried out orders with precision, showing the skill and courage of American airmen in the most extraordinary circumstances, but he also understood that history would judge their mission in ways they could not anticipate. Nearby, Major Thomas Farabee, the bombardier who had released Little Boy, cleaned his instruments meticulously. Each dial, each gauge, represented more than mechanical function. They were tools that had delivered the weight of a nation's final warning. Farabee thought of the city below, of the countless lives altered in seconds, and yet he knew that the mission had also hastened the end of a war that had already claimed millions. His hands trembled slightly, a subtle reminder of the magnitude of their responsibility. Captain Robert Lewis, the co-pilot, sat alone on a crate beside the runway, staring out at the endless expanse of the Pacific Ocean he had recorded in his logbook, hours after the Hiroshima mission. "My God, what have we done?" Those words echoed in his mind, as vivid now as they had been during the flight. The same thoughts returned after Nagasaki, the city obliterated, the fires consuming everything in their path, the mushroom cloud rising like a grim monument to human ingenuity and courage. Yet, despite the horror, there was a clear recognition of their role. They had carried out a mission with precision, bravery, and professionalism that few could comprehend. The crew of Boxcar, who had flown the second mission to Nagasaki, gathered in a small briefing tent later that afternoon. They spoke quietly, reflecting on the flight, the bomb, and the devastation below. Major Charles Sweeney addressed the group. "We executed our orders. The world will understand what this means. The war will end." His words were firm, yet tempered with the weight of awareness that their actions had consequences far beyond the battlefield. Every man nodded, sharing a silent understanding of the historic and devastating power they had delivered. Across the Pacific, as the men debriefed and recorded reports, President Harry S. Truman received the news. Japan had agreed to surrender unconditionally. The war was over. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki had accomplished their strategic objective. Millions of lives would be spared by shortening the war. Yet the price had been unprecedented. The world now faced the dawn of a nuclear age, a reality shaped, in large measure, by the bravery and skill of these 12 men who had flown over Hiroshima and Nagasaki with courage, discipline, and unwavering focus. In the weeks and months that followed, the crew received recognition for their actions. Awards and commendations came, but the true measure of their impact was not in medals or headlines. It was in history itself. The courage, precision, and professionalism demonstrated by American airmen during these missions solidified the United States' dominance in aerial warfare and technological innovation. The atomic bomb missions had not only ended World War II, but had also sent a message to the world. The United States possessed unprecedented power, and its soldiers had the resolve and bravery to wield it when necessary. The legacy of Hiroshima and Nagasaki became a solemn reflection on the costs of war and the responsibilities of power. For the crew, the missions remained both a point of pride and a source of deep contemplation. They had carried out the orders of their nation with exacting precision, delivering a message that ended a global conflict and saved countless lives. Yet, they had also witnessed destruction on a scale never before imagined. As the sun set over Tinian Island, casting a warm glow over the returning bombers, Colonel Tibbets and his crew looked out over the horizon. The Pacific shimmered quietly, indifferent to the human drama that had unfolded above it. In that stillness, they understood the duality of their mission: courage and devastation, precision and consequence, duty and reflection. The atomic age had begun, and the world would never be the same. In the history of warfare, few missions carried the weight of the Enola Gay and the Boxcar. Few crews faced the moral and technical challenges that these American airmen endured. They had delivered the message that ended World War II. They had demonstrated the bravery, skill, and dominance of American soldiers in the most extraordinary circumstances. And as the shadows lengthened across the tarmac, one truth remained. The courage of these 12 men had altered the course of history. leaving a legacy that would echo through generations. The mission was complete. The message delivered. History changed.